In 1969, behavioral researchers studying interrogation footage identified a consistent anomaly in recorded responses. Before any verbal answer began, measurable microactivations appeared in facial muscle groups linked to emotional suppression. The body, not the voice, was initiating the response sequence before cognition completed language formation. What made the finding difficult to dismiss was its timing. The body was reacting before the mind completed its verbal construction. The question that emerged was not whether people lie. It was simpler and more unsettling. How much of what you believe is hidden in the milliseconds before you ever speak? This field of study sits at the intersection of microexpression research and cognitive load theory. It is not concerned with dramatic gestures or obvious tells. It focuses on pre-verbal leakage, neuromuscular activity that occurs during the transition from thought formation to speech execution. The core concept is called pre-speech microreaction latency. It refers to the measurable delay between internal decision formation and external verbal output, during which involuntary signals can appear. Psychologists working in this area draw indirectly from the work of Paul Ekman on microexpressions, Daniel Kahneman's dual system theory of cognition, and deception research influenced by behavioral baseline studies. The central idea is simple in structure but complex in implication. Before a sentence is spoken, the body has already begun to negotiate its truth status. By the end of this analysis, you will not be looking at facial expressions. You will be looking at timing, specifically the milliseconds where control has not yet synchronized with intention. Every spoken sentence passes through a silent phase. In this phase, the brain constructs language, retrieves memory, and evaluates social risk simultaneously. In neutral conditions, this process is seamless. But under pressure, social evaluation, accusation, uncertainty, the system becomes unstable. What researchers observed is that instability does not appear as hesitation in speech. It appears just before speech. Tiny muscular activations occur as competing interpretations of reality briefly surface. The face begins to form one expression while another is still being suppressed. The key error most observers make is assuming deception is a speech problem. It is not. It is a synchronization problem between cognition and motor control. Detection tool: watch the fraction of silence before an answer, not its length but its quality. A clean response has no visible internal preparation. A compromised response often shows microtension before articulation begins. This gap leads directly into the next layer. What happens when the brain is forced to choose between two incompatible internal models? When a person is questioned about uncertain or sensitive information, the brain does not retrieve a single answer. It retrieves multiple competing versions. One version is socially safe, one is accurate, one is emotionally protective. This competition activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with conflict monitoring. The body responds before resolution is complete. This is where microreactions originate, not from lying itself, but from selection pressure between internal narratives. Deception, in most cases, is not the creation of falsehood. It is the suppression of alternatives. Suppression produces measurable tension. What you can observe: slight asymmetry in facial activation during response onset. One side of the face often engages fractionally earlier than the other, reflecting incomplete motor alignment. This leads into a more refined question. If the brain is managing multiple truths, can the body distinguish which one is being chosen? Emotion does not remain internal. It leaks into motor planning systems even when suppressed cognitively. In experiments involving socially sensitive questions, subjects often display brief activation in the zygomatic muscles associated with forced or restrained expression before neutral verbal delivery. This is not emotion showing on the face in the traditional sense. It is emotion interfering with motor preparation. The face does not express emotion. It reveals interference between emotion and control. Detection tool: focus on the transition from listening to answering. Emotional contamination is most visible in this transition, not during speech itself. At this stage, we encounter an important limitation. These signals are not always indicators of deception. They are indicators of internal conflict intensity, which introduces a complication that changes the entire framework. But here is where it becomes more complex. The same microreactions that appear during deception also appear during memory retrieval, emotional recall, and even careful truth-telling under pressure. A subject answering honestly about a traumatic event can produce identical facial microactivations to someone fabricating information. This is where early interpretations of microexpression research failed. They assumed one signal, saw one meaning. The reality is more subtle. The system does not encode truth or lie. It encodes cognitive load and emotional strain. The most dangerous misunderstanding in behavioral science is the belief that human signals are categorical. Most are probabilistic under stress. What changes everything is not what the signal is, but what caused the load that produced it. This shifts analysis away from detecting lies toward mapping internal conflict architecture. And that brings us to the most overlooked layer of all: timing precision. When cognitive load increases, time perception within decision-making becomes unstable. Subjects often experience what feels like a normal pause, but objective measurement shows micro-delays distributed unevenly across facial and vocal systems. The voice may begin before the face is fully synchronized, or the face may resolve an expression before speech begins. This desynchronization is critical. Human communication is only convincing when all output systems agree on timing. Disharmony in timing is more revealing than content. Detection tool. Observe whether facial neutrality stabilizes before speech begins, or whether expression continues to adjust during the first words. This leads to a deeper implication. If timing is the real signal, then deception is not about what is said, but about when different systems commit to the same output, which brings us to the broader psychological consequence. If these patterns are consistent across individuals, then what you are observing is not deception. It is cognitive friction made visible. Every person under pressure exhibits microstructural instability between thought, emotion, and speech. This means that reading people is not the study of lies or truth. It is the study of internal alignment under stress. And alignment is not stable. It changes with context, stakes, and perceived risk. The unsettling implication is not that people can be decoded, it is that people are rarely fully synchronized with themselves in the moments that matter most, which raises a quiet question. If internal conflict is universal under pressure, how much of what you present as certainty is actually temporary alignment? The knowledge transfer, 13 size 15, Weiss. Now that the mechanism is clear, observation becomes structured. Not intuitive, not emotional, structured. First, watch for pre-speech timing gaps. Not silence, but micro-instability before speech initiation. That is where cognitive load is visible. Second, observe facial synchronization. The most reliable indicator is not expression, but whether all facial regions commit to the same state at the same time. Third, separate signal from cause. A micro-reaction does not indicate deception, it indicates internal competition. Your task is not interpretation, it is context reconstruction. Skilled observers do not look for lies. They look for moments when the mind has not yet agreed with itself, and once you can see that, conversations stop being about words. They become about structure. Because beneath every sentence, there is a fraction of time where intention is still unorganized, and that fraction reveals more than language ever will. The next layer of this research moves from micro-reactions into behavioral pattern prediction, how repeated timing distortions begin forming recognizable personality signatures under pressure.